Welcome to Under the Microscope. This series is brought to you by the Real Scientists Nano team. Our goal is to provide a platform where scientists can communicate their work and interact with the public. With that in mind, every week we introduce you to a scientist working in the field of materials and nanoscience, who would be curating the RealSci_Nano Twitter account. Hello everyone. Today we have with us Patrick Spicer, who is an associate professor of chemical engineering at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. Hi Pat, lovely to have you on Real Scientist Nano.
Hi, lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Let's start by understanding your scientific journey so far. So how did you end up in your current research field?
So it was a bit of an odyssey, but there was always a common thread moving through the work that I did. I grew up in the East Coast of the United States in a state called Delaware, and wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but the company DuPont chemical company is based there and came out of Delaware, as did Joe Biden. And the way that I got to where I am was being around chemical engineers, chemists, scientists, and really not knowing entirely what I wanted to do, but taking on chemical engineering as a degree and a career that I thought would enable me to do a lot of things. And in the course of doing my undergraduate degree, every summer I would work with the Oceanography School from the University of Delaware, which was located near my hometown and on the coastline of the US. And so I learned to do science in oceanography labs, and I really fell in love with research there. And at the same time, was being trained to be a chemical engineer, to go into industry and do very practical things. And so where I am today really comes from a hybrid of being very interested in science and scientific research, but also in its practical application. And so as a result of being exposed to all these grad students and PhD students and research, I enlisted in a PhD program when I finished up my degree and got my PhD in chemical engineering. And after that, I went to work for a company called Procter & Gamble in the United States. And I worked there for 15 years and learned all about the types of products that they make. And I worked in a central research facility that did engineering support. And so really what I do now, which is around studying complex fluids and their flow and how to design those properties and get them to interact with the human body or inorganic substrates, that kind of thing, really came out of this sort of background of both science, engineering research, and applied uses of some of that research.
Mm-hmm. That's quite a journey you've had. I mean, I do have a very it might sound naive, but do you see any commonalities between the oceanographists that oceanographers and your research right now? Do you see like a flashback that, oh yeah, back then I remember we used to do this as well?
Yes, definitely. And it's funny, there was a realization I had in my career probably 10 years in when I was in industry that particles and small particles always factored into whatever I was doing. When I worked with oceanographers, the group that I worked with, they were chemical oceanographers. And in many ways, those are very much like chemical engineers because both care about the flow of chemicals and nutrients into and out of either a body of water or a big chemical reactor. Mm-hmm. But the group that I worked with was looking specifically at phytoplankton, so very small organisms. And those particles or living particles basically could clog things, they could enrich things, they could carry out chemical reactions. And throughout my research, microparticles, nanoparticles, biological particles, there was always something there in the work I was doing. No matter how I try to get away from it, there's always a nanoparticle or a small particle floating around somewhere.
It always brought you back to it. It attracted, like it's like a magnet. It was always there with you. That's interesting.
I'm surrounded. Yeah.
There is no way to escape. That's it. Uh, all right, that's really interesting. So you did speak about this a little bit, but I do want to ask you separately as a separate question. Where does your current research fall in this big picture of materials and or nanoscience in this big puzzle? Where does it fit?
Uh, I would say really a lot of it is looking at what's going on now and seeing what problems need solving using the types of materials that I have some expertise in.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the projects that I have funded right now is around small particles, again, of pollen and proteins that come out of pollen. And we're actually researching how that affects really dangerous conditions called thunderstorm asthma that I'm happy to talk about. But where it fits is really looking at a situation like that where people can have sudden catastrophic respiratory symptoms come on simply because natural materials like pollen get pulled into a thunderstorm and are changed irreparably in a way that really affects people's health. And what I'm looking at right now is how does that interact with the human body? So how do complex fluids like our mucus protect us or not against these kinds of materials? And also, how do I think about the process that actually occurred in that thundercloud and duplicated in the lab so that I can figure out a little bit more about how to predict whether something like this is going to happen? So maybe I'm getting a bit too specific for your question because you're sort of asking how it fits into things, but it's really taking some of the soft materials and the fluids research that we do and seeing where can this best be applied. Even though we're not really doing it in a commercial sense like I used to, we're still on the lookout for good problems or really important problems that we can apply this to.
This definitely helps a lot in understanding a little bit where your research is right now. And I must say that this is very, very important research that you're doing. I hope you get all the funding you need. I hope you get all the papers published and everything. I really hope for that.
Thank
So
you.
you also mentioned that you do create similar like thunderstorm sort of conditions in the lab probably. So speaking of that, it sounds like you do a lot of interesting projects and have done a lot of interesting projects in the past as well. But if you have to pick one that you're most proud of, or you're most excited about, or the most fun or quirky one, I know it's difficult because it sounds like you have done a lot of interesting work. But can you pick one and explain it to us in simple words in the section we call In Other Words?
Sure. So when I was working in industry, one of the projects we started working on was looking at how to deliver materials across human skin. And this is something that lots of people want to do. They want to find ways to either deliver medicine or just things that soften skin. And at the time, there were a number of opportunities for this, but most of them had been patented. And so we were looking at materials that were novel or new. And one of these things was called cubosomes. And they're basically they're nano-sized cubes that look like they're solid because they've got sharp corners and everything when you look at them under an electron microscope, but they're actually made up of lipids. And the very soft materials, when you put them in water in the right conditions, they'll form these particles. And so we originally developed a process to make these particles that didn't involve using a lot of energy and was easy and could be scaled up. When we went looking for applications for this, one of the things we had to do was screen the materials to see if they were safe on human skin. Did they irritate skin? Did they cause problems? And so we partnered with doctors I was in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the US at the time, partners at the Children's Hospital, and they tested it for us. And in talking to them, they made a remark offhand and said, it's really interesting. This is very much like the structure of your skin. If you look under the surface of your skin, these sorts of lipids self-assemble and they form these interesting structures. And we would really like to have something like this that we could use for premature babies. And so what was interesting about this was when you're born with a little bit of a coating on called the vernix, right? You have this kind of cheesy coating when you come out. And that's actually a template for your skin, your stratum corneum. And so if you're born prematurely, you don't have that chance for that outer layer to grow. And so you're in a lot of danger from infection. And at the time, there was no product that could be put on these babies that would protect them against this infection and allow their skin to kind of come in and grow. And in the course of testing these materials that we had developed, the researchers realized that it was unusual, because if you take something like petroleum jelly and put it on your skin, it protects your skin, it keeps moisture in, but it doesn't let your skin breathe or transport across it because it's not permeable, not very permeable. But the material that we created was, and it was very unique in that sense that it could protect the skin, but also allow the skin to breathe. And so what was funny was we were trying to make this sort of commercial product, make everybody's skin soft or beautiful, or, if you had a sore knee, you could rub it in and make it feel a little bit better. But we got really driven by this idea and said, look, this is what we need to do with this material. And we worked with Children's Hospital to actually transfer the technology there. And they developed the first artificial vernix out of this material. So I was always very proud of that work, because it really contributed to some of the, certainly it's not the only thing, it's not the best thing, but it was one of the first things that was done to really try and mitigate those problems. And every time I would talk about it, it was so nice, because people would come up afterwards and say, I had a premature baby, or I was a premature baby, and I'm so happy that these kinds of things were done. And it was a great experience, because there were great people we were working with across the board.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that sounds really, really. It's very noble and really nice, and this is a perfect example of how science, when it is working together with the like interdisciplinary, solving the real life problems, even the real life problems of tiniest humans, because they are the ones who are the most vulnerable. Because
Exactly.
they yeah, this is so. Is it like, if I may ask, is it like a cream that you just apply on the babies, the premature babies?
That's right. Yeah, I think in the end, I don't know. I'm not sure if they ever fully commercialized it or not. I know they patented it, and I know they were testing it. And as with anything, certainly testing on people takes quite a bit of time.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things that even however far something like that gets. I mean, when you work in an industry that develops products, you're used to about 95% of them never seeing the light of day. So it doesn't break my heart when that happens. But that one was fun, because it got pretty far down the track, and I think there are a lot more offerings out there now, because people know a lot more about this.
Okay, all right. That sounds really, really interesting, and I can understand why you picked this as the research experience that you're most proud of. I completely
That was an
understand.
easy one.
All right, wonderful. So, Pat, let's move a bit away from research. Let's get out of the lab and probably go towards the other parts of a researcher's life, which is teaching. So, do you teach any courses? And if you do, would you like to mention some?
Yes, yeah, I have taught ever since I came to the university. I've been an academic now for almost 8 years. And when I started, I taught from the beginning. And it was interesting, because in chemical engineering at UNSW, we have a concentration of food scientists. And so when I first came here, I taught into chemical engineering and food science, because my research really sort of spans those areas. But really, the courses that I'm teaching now are ones that, well, actually, I've developed both of them now that I think of it. But one is on the fundamental science of complex fluids. So how fluids that aren't like water, how they flow, how we can design them, how we can fix them if they don't flow the way we want to. Everybody's seen people running on cornstarch on YouTube, right? So this is an example of the types of fluids that we talk about, design, and work with. But I also teach a class, actually 2 classes, on designing chemical products. So what we look at is, how do we do the kinds of things that I used to do when I was in industry, where you would look at something like the premature baby situation and say, how could we solve this problem? What are the elements of the problem? How could we do this using formulation techniques, using scientific techniques? And how can we test it and evaluate it and potentially even commercialize it? So those are the 2 courses that I focus on mostly now, and I love them, because it really brings together my experience and my passions in one place.
Yeah, that sounds. Can I attend those courses? Is it possible to attend those courses online, especially the food one?
I think we're in a whole new world now. I think everybody can attend these courses now. There's no geographical limitations anymore.
Absolutely. So let me just like try to keep up with the different fields of scientists you have worked with. You have worked with oceanographers, you're now working with the food scientists, you have worked with the chemical industry, you have worked with hospitals, you worked
Hmm.
with babies, you're also doing work with this thunderstorm asthma, so with
Yeah,
pollen.
the meteorologist.
Yeah, am I missing any? Did I summarize?
Oh, probably. I'm trying to think, but that was a good summary. I'll take that. That sounds fair.
Yeah, probably some physicists as well. Let's just throw them on the mix as well. I'm sure you're also working with
Definitely.
physicists.
I love, yeah, the modern physics movement, especially around some of the work in soft condensed matter, has really been a strong influence on me. So I really should definitely note them.
Okay, all right. So that's like okay. This is like wow. Okay, my mind is blown completely. Like this is really interesting. A very rich
Well, I love to
experience.
collaborate. Collaboration is just central to the work that I do. I love it. And when I worked in industry, one of my jobs was to work with academics and seed ideas and fund research, but also really just collaborate and bridge work that was going on, because that's always been an aspect of my work. So it shows. I really like working with other people.
That's really nice. We need scientists like you who are doing interdisciplinary research and trying to are okay with stepping out of the comfort zone a little bit and going to different departments and different fields of research and collaborating in general. This is really good. Yeah. Let's move a bit to back to the research in terms of research experience now.
Hmm.
I hope your experience so far has been wonderful. It sounds like it has been wonderful, and I hope it continues to be wonderful. However, if you had three wishes to improve your research experience, what would you ask for? And I'm not promising anything here.
Understand. Okay. But I think it's the nature of our field to ask for things and want things that we might not necessarily be able to have. So that's a good thing. But
Mhm.
I think so. One of the things that came to my mind when you asked this was I'm in a unique position because I always like to say I'm old but new. I came to an academic position at a different part of my career than many people do, and so I got to come in with a bit of perspective and maturity and experience, and that has helped a lot, because I think one of the things I've seen around me, because we've hired a lot of new young people, a lot of really good people, and I think the academic experience is characterized by both intensity of good things, but also sometimes of bad things. I think there's a tremendous amount of stress, especially on new researchers and young researchers in academia. And some of that's self-imposed, but a lot of that is system-imposed. And I think it's also characterized by a great love of science and research and knowledge. And so those two things come together and can be very volatile. And so I think one thing I would wish for is for that experience for people who are young and more vulnerable and don't have as many resources to be improved as much as possible. And so I think that's something I try to work toward, but also I think everybody could, especially experienced people who can have some influence. So that's my first wish. I think is an improved experience for early career researchers.
Mhm. Okay. Do you have two more wishes?
Yeah, one maybe a fourth one would be for my dog to stop barking, but um, so probably the second one would be really this opportunity we have with virtual conferences to continue to expand and grow. Because I think I lived in the U.S. for a lot of my life, went to conferences in Europe and the U.S. and didn't have to travel very far. And I think that's great for me, but I think for a lot of people it was a really tough barrier to get over, to get to people and talks and all that. So I really hope we don't go back to the old school completely after the lockdown and all these sorts of things reverse, because I think it's a really important thing for people to have that kind of accessibility to conferences and knowledge and people. So that's a real wish of mine, is for that to continue to expand and be a positive force.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I really hope as well that the virtual conferences do continue to exist and get more popular, even after things go back to the old normal. The old normal.
Exactly.
Yeah. So those are the two wishes, really good wishes. Do you have a third one, maybe?
Yeah, I think my last one is really just for myself in terms of self-improvement. I think I have a real interest. I've always had an interest in scientific communication, but one of the things I want to do is keep getting better at it, because I'm sure I'm kind of somewhere in the middle right now, but I'd really like to learn more, connect more with people doing it. But I was really excited to hear from you when this invitation came out, because I think this is the kind of approach that we need to take. And so I really hope for improved abilities in the area of scientific communication. I'm working actively on that.
Okay, wonderful. That's really good. And I'm also very happy to hear that you're already working on your third wish and making it come true.
It's always the best way.
Yeah, that's always the best way. Absolutely, absolutely. Um, let's talk a little bit, Pat. Now let's talk a little bit about the future. So, what are you most looking forward to in the next 3 months?
Oh, well, certainly on a global scale, I hope a lot of the things that are going on right now come to a more pleasant fruition for everybody involved. I think there's a lot, really, there are a lot of big issues going on in the world. And I think, as you said, interdisciplinarity really is more and more important, because a lot of the problems that we face are bigger, and they require a lot of very different resources. So I'm certainly looking forward to that happening in the world. From the perspective of my own research, we talked a little bit about the work we're doing on thunderstorm asthma, and we're starting to get some really exciting results out of that, where we're able to really see direct observations of some of the things that these pollen grains and these materials that are so potentially dangerous, what they are doing in the conditions that some of these storms have brought about. And so to me, it's just fascinating to be able to reproduce some of these natural processes, but also see for the first time, I think, how to control and really how to understand how extreme some of these conditions and behaviors of these particles can be. So we've got some new data coming out of that. I'm really very excited about what we will find there.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds. Looking forward to reading more about the thunderstorm asthma as well. This is one of the new things I've learned today. Thunderstorm asthma. Definitely gonna look out for it. What's coming, especially from your lab. What's coming out? Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. So, Pat, before we let you go, what we want to understand from you is what are the big challenges that the scientists in your field are trying to solve? So, what are the big questions that the community is working towards answering?
Well, one of the things that I'm focused a lot on in the big picture sense is how to think about our field, which is complex fluids or soft matter, depending on who you talk to, and how that can be used to contribute to big issues like global health and really sustainability. And one of the things that we've been looking at is how can we think about taking and vastly improving the stability of materials like vaccines or even just normal health-giving products. I mean, we've seen how important things like hand sanitizer have become in the last several months. And a lot of those things are great, but they often don't transport well, or they're very expensive to transport, and they create a real load on expenses and transport costs around the world. So we've been looking a lot at sustainability and really how we can get these kinds of things out to people in a more robust way, because there are many countries that are just not well served by some of these materials because they're expensive. I'm not really like the first world, third world terminology so much, but I think some countries have a real plethora of these kinds of things, and other ones really struggle. And I think increasing accessibility especially around, I come from the consumer products area, the medical products area, and we're talking about nanoscience, and I think all these kinds of things really come together in that space, but we need interdisciplinary groups looking at these kinds of things, people with commercial backgrounds, engineering backgrounds, science, medical backgrounds, looking at this to address this, because I think if we don't have global solutions for these things, it's not going to really serve people well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you very much for summarizing the challenges for us. I think we understand the field a little better now. So thank you very much, Pat, for speaking with us. I personally have learned a lot of interesting things from you, and we are very, very looking forward to having you on Real Scientist Nano. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed chatting, and I look forward to taking part in this and seeing successive curators after this. So thanks again for the opportunity.
Our pleasure.
Thank you for listening. To know more about us, please visit our website, realscientistsnano.org, and follow us on Twitter at realsci_nano.